what advice would you give to other academics who want to improve the way they communicate expectations to students?
I think listen to the students. Go back, look at what you are teaching. There are some academics who don't even look at the slides because, the slides are there. They just think they'll turn up and do them. Understand your own work, understand what you're teaching, and always look up new and exciting things you want to bring in. I always tell my own life story from time to time within reason about what I'm teaching.
So, hello and welcome to another episode of Unfiltered by EmpowerED, the podcast where we have unedited conversations with educators from around the globe. I'm your host, Caroline, and in our podcast, we have conversations with passionate educators to uncover the challenges, celebrate the successes, and inspire with the real stories from the front lines of education. So today, I'm thrilled to be joined by Geeta, who actually works at the same university as me, which is the University of Sunderland in London, as a lecturer in public health. We're delighted to have her today to share her innovative and insightful work. Geeta, welcome to Unfiltered by EmpowerED. To start off, could you tell us a little bit about yourself, your current role, and your experience so far in the education sector?
Hello, Caroline. Thank you so much for that lovely introduction. Delighted to be here on your podcast. So, I joined the University of Sunderland in March 2022. Prior to that, I have worked at the universities of Reading, Sussex, and Hertfordshire, and even UCL, where I have actually been involved in teaching and also in research. So my background spans in the teaching field from the year 2007 right up to now. So many, many years. I am an academic pharmacist, which means although I am a UK registered practicing pharmacist, I teach in universities, schools of pharmacies. I have taught pharmacy practice. I have taught pharmaceutical formulations. So there are many, many different areas that I've taught. Um, and then at Sussex, where I had my longest stint, and I thought that that's where I was going to end my career, basically. They ended my career for me, surprisingly enough, because the pharmacy degree program was shut down in 2022. So we were made redundant. And during the COVID-19 year, I went online because obviously we'd been given pre-warning about us being made redundant. So I went online. I've always loved global health. And I did an MSc in global health at the Brighton and Sussex Medical School. I graduated with a distinction, and that landed me a job with the University of Sunderland in London. It was the first job I'd applied for, and I got the job and I was delighted. And the rest, as they say, is history. I've been here for 2 years. So I have a passion for learning and teaching, basically. I also have research passion in antimicrobial resistance, but that's something that we do on a social scale. So it doesn't allow me to go into the laboratories, but we look at how antimicrobial resistance has evolved in the low and middle income countries. And I often work with colleagues from other countries as well on this topic. So that's me so far, Caroline.
Wow, that's an amazing journey, and we're delighted to have you here as well. So I'm really happy to hear it's the first job you applied for and got. That's always lovely when that happens. It's like it's meant to be.
It is.
So, taking us back to, so you said you have a particular passion for ensuring that students can learn effectively. So what inspired you to focus on methods for helping students learn, and in particular around setting expectations?
Okay, so in my experience over the many, many years, I have learned that students are mainly driven by marks. They want to know what they've got and they want to know whether they've passed. And worse still, they want to know whether they've passed with a distinction. And I think if you look back at our own selves, as when we were students, we always aspired to do the best. So when teaching pharmacy, which is how I started in the academic field, um, we have on average our intake for any 1 year is about 150 to 200 students, but they are international students. They come from different diverse backgrounds. There are diverse cultures. They have different levels of education. And one of the things that I was tasked with teaching was numeracy skills. And that's a little bit tricky because in pharmacy, you have to know your calculations. You cannot overdose a patient, you can kill a patient. So it's very, very important that we teach students how to calculate calculations, the right drug doses for different types of formulations. So it gets even more tricky in that way. So my task was, how do I start? I cannot go in and throw calculations at them and expect them to do them. I needed to understand the audience that I was teaching. So I was working with a colleague and we came up with a diagnostic test. Now, some might say, what is this? Well, it's a simple test. We developed a simple PowerPoint calculation. So we were bringing in digital technology to begin with, which was a very clever move and also a very simple move at the time. And what we did, we started off by putting on calculations on a PowerPoint. And it was something like, what is 1 + 1? We gave them 10 seconds to answer that. Then it moved on to the next one. And as it graduated, we put out 20 questions. And as they graduated, the questions became harder and harder. And they were more aligned to what we would expect of them if they, to the point from starting a pharmacy degree program to the point of graduating. Because in order for a pharmacist to practice in the UK, they need to pass a national exam. And the national paper consists of 40 pharmaceutical calculations, which 20 they have to do without the aid of a calculator. And this is what we found. When we put out the diagnostic test, we didn't allow them to use calculators. Students didn't understand decimal points because they are so digitally minded. They just pick up a calculator, what is 0.1 plus 0.01, they will not know how to do it. They will put that in a calculator. So we had to go back to some of the basics. We had to make them understand, what are the basic concepts? How do you get around this? There are formulas. They are formula driven. We wanted them to understand the formula. So it was all about scaffolding. When you go back to the constructivism theory, we wanted to bring that in. We wanted them to understand that this is how you start. So what we did with the diagnostic test, we found out the areas that the students were finding the most difficulties in. And then we started designing the curriculum. We started offering them half-hour classes during lunch break so they could come in. We also did a set of calculations with answers and methods as to how you would attempt them. And in all the universities thereafter, we had a different system of personal academic tutors. Each academic was assigned 5 students. So what we would do, we would send that sheet of calculations to the academic, and then they would get their students to do them and then take them through that. So we were creating work, but we were also dividing and conquering the workload at the same time. So there were so many different levels at which we were getting the students to engage. This diagnostic test, we published a paper on that in 2010, 2011, and then another one in 2014. What we did was we identified the weaker students. We identified students who didn't have the same level of education in maths, from different countries, from different backgrounds. So that for us was a real win-win situation. In fact, it worked so well that whichever university I went to work in, I used the technique and it worked. We at Sussex, I used the same thing again. I was put in charge of calculations and maths. And the students, our students, when before they go in for the national exams, they have to do a 1-year internship. In order to get into a proper hospital or a pharmacy to do the internship, they have to do the test. and we came out at the top end. It was that good. So that was really, really, really great achievement for us. So we went from something very simple to something, which was nationally recognized. The second thing was a colleague of mine came to me. She said, I have the same issue in chemistry. And she is a colleague at University of Hertfordshire. So I said to her, well, why don't you develop a diagnostic test and see where it goes? And she ran with it. She's now a principal, a national teaching fellow. So she ran with this idea. So they're very simple ideas. They work very well and they get students engaged. But they also offer us to tailor the curriculum and see the students on a one-to basis. So we know where they're going wrong and how we can help them.
Thank you so much for sharing all of that, Geeta. Like, there's some absolutely amazing ideas in there. And unfortunately, we don't have time to go through everything in as much detail as we'd like, but that was an excellent overview and some really great work going on. But yes, with the rapid development of technology, how do you anticipate the way in which you've been doing things, the way in which expectations are communicated to students might change in the future?
I think that it's going to get a little bit more tricky. It's going to get a little bit more difficult. I think the first thing that I do find is that we just go on the internet to look up things. People don't want to engage with the more tricky technology. So I think that something like Articulate Storyline 2 software, where we are developing, what we're doing is we're creating the material that they can access and look at. For them to go and create something, I think is going to be quite a challenge. Why do I say this? I say this because of from the simple poster development exercise that I run with the students. That is very basic because to me and I've had my education in the Western world, and for me, I've always learned how to engage with the technology. I've never had to really think quite as much as to what I will do, how can I do it, but I will go and I'll teach myself, I'll learn myself. But it's about accessibility. These students don't have that accessibility. So whilst the students in the Western Hemisphere may be better equipped for these challenges, I think globally you need to look at the global South. I think these are the digital illiteracy challenges we're going to face. So whilst we are developing the technology here, I think we're always going to have some people who are always going to be left behind. It clearly, and it always was, and it always is going to be a north-south divide, I'm afraid. Yes. I hope that answers
Yeah,
your question.
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And it also leads into obviously something that we're all quite passionate about within the digital team at the university, which is kind of like, do you think there's anything specific that we could be doing to ensure that the students who do join us who don't have those digital skills, how can we kind of bring them up to the same level as those who are probably home students and have had that access to technology?
Well, now that's the big ask because when you think about how long they're going to be with you, are they doing an undergraduate degree program where they're going to be there for 3 years, or are they going to be doing a master's where they're going to be there for 1 year? And again, what kind of technology are we going to require them to know about? So, from my viewpoint, I think there are some things like I teach the poster creation within one workshop and then we run with it. So, that's doable. But if there was something more intricate, and I know our university runs Microsoft Word programs, that is quite difficult. I think maybe you could start them off in the induction week and then see them through over the week. So by the time they complete their first module or second module, they will have got a set of skills. I don't know, that would work potentially. I could see that working actually, because then they could use that for the rest of the year. But learning about the simple Excel program, that is also difficult. I've found with the students, when I get them to do simple statistics, for example, when we're doing project work, I say to them, open up your Excel spreadsheet, and they'll look at me and they'll say, okay, how do I put this in? Importing data from Excel into the SPSS software for research methods, again, is an issue. They are just not doing that. So I think those sort of packages we can maybe have a concentrated 1 or 2 day program where they go in, they do it, or maybe you could run it over a few weeks. it's impossible. The logistics would depend on how you'd want to do it. But I think these are the sort of things that need looking at. A lot of students do qualitative studies. Um, Qualitative studies require use of software like NVivo. I mean, you can go and do it by hand. It'll take you a few weeks, few months to analyze transcripts. I think one interview is 14 hours of transcription. But the point that I'm trying to make is that those software, even though they're available, students don't know how to use them. So we as academics don't always have that time to teach them. And it becomes far too late for us to realize that they don't know these things. And one of the things I actually did bring in, which has already been done, is how to use SPSS software. So we used to have one session in the dissertation. But now we brought that. I mean, it was already there, I believe, in the research methods. So they have a session in the research methods about using SPSS, but in the dissertation, I've got one of our esteemed lecturers. He's absolutely brilliant guy, Patrick Igulot. He comes in and he does 2 weeks. So students have 6 hours of SPSS, which is really important for them to know and understand. But I think rather than put that in a dissertation, it could have been done at the beginning with some examples and exercises. So, and then we have a revision. So then they know where they're at. So these are the sort of things from my viewpoint as a scientist teaching public health, where I think these things are important. But again, I think the other basic thing is use of the English language. And this came out in the hidden curriculum agenda. And this was about transparency, use of certain words, critical appraisal, critical analysis. What is that? And I said about underpinning. But there were many other things that came up. Somebody had used the word boot camp. We are going to have a boot camp on critical evaluation. And the students were, what is boot camp? What are we supposed to do? So I think we need to be very mindful of the kind of the English terminologies that we use when we have an international class. So these are some of the things we need to really go back and focus on and reflect on and see where we can make adjustments so we are inclusive of everybody. I think
Yeah.
inclusion is also a big issue here. Um,
Yeah.
and we need to be mindful of that. I think
Yeah.
for someone like me, I was brought up in the UK, but I also come from an ethnic background, so I have that insight. I can instantly connect with a lot of students about many things. So as someone of an Indian ethnicity, I can connect with all the Indian students. I can understand what their difficulties are, the cultural issues. As someone who's born in Africa, I have a deep connection with all my African students. We talk about things and it's great. You find a rapport with the students, and it's so important to make that connection and make them feel welcome. I do find as an academic, you have to be accessible. Many
Hmm.
academics, once they get into that role, they want to get the job done. And I think sometimes you lose sight of where you need to make that connection. If you make the connection, you're making yourself open within limits, of course. And, the students they feel they can come to you and they can talk to you about things. And which is also very important because if they're struggling, we need to be able to understand where the struggle is and how to help them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really like your use of the word inclusive there because I recently did a learning on LinkedIn on inclusivity. And obviously, a huge focus of all universities recently has been accessibility, when actually it should be inclusivity. Things like thinking about the fact that not all students will understand what we consider to be quite a simple word.
Yes.
So, yeah, that's really excellent. Have you got any other ways in which you ensure, obviously, all of your learning and associated materials are inclusive?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the exercises I run, they are very, very open. So we go through the marking criteria, and I say to them about this. But this is very interesting. You mentioned this. When it's like a light bulb. A light bulb has gone on for the mass of them because they tend to see we have the criteria for them. They don't access them. I don't know why they don't access them, because it's there. They should be going through this. They should be trawling through this. Maybe one of the things the digital team can do is at the beginning, in the induction, bring in a session where you take them through the whole canvas and tell them, this is where you find these things, and this is where the marking criteria are. I think that's so important. So that's the first thing. But I think in terms of making everything accessible for them is to highlight the difference between resources and sources. What do we give them, and where are they going to find them? I think this is another issue that we don't tend to think about. It's where we take those two words as what we understand and what they will understand. We think they will understand that, but they don't. And this is very important as well. So we need to go back. And like I said, if you're going to make them inclusive, we need to, in a class, get them all together and say, this is what we do, this is how we do it. Now you are going to do it. And you are going to tell us what is it you're finding difficult. And then it comes out all in the open. And then you realize, this is what I'm doing. I'm making this accessible. I'm making this inclusive. I'm not leaving anyone out. Even the shy ones, you can walk around the class. And I have this awful habit. If a student is shy and they're looking to the ground, they're the first ones I'm going to pick on. And those who look at me and they're very keen to answer the question, I will pick on them as well. There's no getting away. But it is about saying to everyone, you're not going to hide. You cannot hide, because I'm not going to let you hide. So I think a lot of onus is on the academic as well. How much are they willing to get involved in this? I think that's the key that you need to think about, because some people just like to teach. They do the lecture and then they're out of the class. Some like to go in a little bit more. And then myself, I'm obsessed. I need to get inside their heads. I need to know what they're thinking. Why aren't they in my class? What's keeping them out? Attendance is very important. If you're going to run a boring lecture, you're not going to get students coming in. So you need to make things exciting. You need to give them a carrot. What are we going to do next week? How are we going to do it? What do I need you to bring in? So if you give them things like this, I need you to bring your laptop in next week because we are going to do X, Y, and Z, they will all turn up, because they'll say, oh yeah, she wants laptops. There's something going on, And it's very, very interesting as to how you can play into the psyche, really. But it's all for them, not for us.
Absolutely. I remember being in primary school, and whenever they'd say you're going to have a workshop in the computer room, everyone used to get so excited. So yes, like you say, it's about finding those little things that will encourage them to keep coming. I mean, I could talk about this all day, but I'm very mindful of time. So I've just got one last question for you, which I think will sum up all the fantastic work you've done quite nicely. What advice would you give to other academics who want to improve the way they communicate expectations to students?
I think listen to the students. Go back, look at what you are teaching. There are some academics who don't even look at the slides, because the slides are there. They just think they'll turn up and do them. Understand your own work. Understand what you're teaching, and always look up new and exciting things you want to bring in. I always tell my own life story from time to time, within reason, about what I'm teaching. And it always, it brings up a nerve with the students, because they tend to connect. So I think it's not just about reading off slides. I think you go in, you connect, you look at the work you're teaching, you look at how you want them to learn, you look at whether you want them to bring up the attainment or not. I think that's important, isn't it? Really, in the bigger picture of things. So I think these sort of things are very, very important. Connect with the work you are teaching and make sure you're accessible to them. I think those two things are the most important things. Understand your student and your work.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Geeta. Like I said, that's going to bring us to the end of today's episode of Unfiltered by EmpowerED. A huge thank you to Geeta for joining us and sharing such valuable insights into how we can help students to learn and set those expectations for our students. Thank you, Geeta, for sharing your valuable insights. If our listeners do want to reach out to you and follow up, is there a way in which they could do that?
Yes, absolutely. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm also Geeta.Hitch at sunderland.ac.uk. So I'm on the website. I'm on the university URL as well. Please feel free
Yeah.
to contact me. Happy to collaborate, happy to help. Anything.
Amazing. Thank you, Geeta. And yeah, we'll share Geeta's details along with the podcast when it gets posted. Thank you also to our listeners for tuning in. We hope this conversation inspires you to start thinking about how you are helping your students to learn and setting expectations at your own institutions. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel to stay updated on all our latest episodes. And until next time, stay curious and empowered.
Thank you very much, Caroline. Goodbye from me.